Thank you very much, Convener, and good afternoon, First Minister. Last week, the UK Government introduced its mini-budget. Has the Scottish Government carried out any assessment of the impact that this will have on the measures introduced here in Scotland to tackle poverty and the cost crisis? And can the First Minister outline how the Scottish Government is working with local authorities in the third sector to support people, and what additional fiscal flexibilities do you think are required to ensure that the Scottish Government is able to continue to deliver for those most in need?
First Minister.
Thank you. I'll try to, as briefly as I can, Presiding Officer, take the three parts of that question. Firstly, in terms of our analysis of the budget on Friday, as you can imagine, given events since Friday, that is very much an ongoing exercise. I think it is quite hard to overstate the impact that Friday's budget will have on poverty, inequality and the financial stress that millions of people are going to be living under. Obviously, much of the immediate attention after the Chancellor spoke on Friday was on the distributional impact of some of these policies themselves. And my view, I think, is well known. I think it was very difficult, I think, to defend the policies in those terms. The statistics are well known by now. The vast bulk of the added borrowing that is funding tax cuts is going to the very, very richest in society. I think 45% or thereabouts of the value of those tax cuts will go to the top 5% of income earners in the country. As the IFS set out, only those over £155,000 will benefit at all. Everybody else below that income threshold will lose. So that, in terms of our analysis, will obviously make those at the very top of the income wealth spectrum even richer and wealthier. But because that raises effectively the relative poverty line, it puts more people into relative poverty. So that is a matter of concern. But I think since Friday, we are beginning to we are very starkly realising now that the wider impacts of the budget are likely to be much greater than those immediate impacts. So obviously since Friday we've seen the collapse in the pound. That will fuel inflation, which will make the cost of living crisis worse. We're already seeing the cost of borrowing increasing, cost of government borrowing increasing, but there is now, I think, the inevitability of a sharp rise in interest rates, which is going to have a very profound impact on those with mortgages, those with credit card debt, and that will push more people into very serious financial stress. And we've had warnings in the last 24 hours from the IMF. We've just had the quite extraordinary, as a word that's overused in political discourse, I think it is appropriate this morning, intervention of the Bank of England concerned about serious financial instability. Speculation this morning of pension funds about to fall over. So we have the Bank of England staging an emergency intervention, not to respond to some external shock or global event, but to try to reduce the damage of the UK government's own policies. I mean, it is really extraordinary and unprecedented, and I do think there needs to be very urgent and immediate action taken. I don't think we should see the policies announced on Friday as inevitable. Now, I think as an immediate symbol of some kind of good sense being restored, the decision to abolish the top rate of tax should be reversed. And clearly that would have an impact on some of what I spoke about earlier on. So I don't think it's possible to overstate the damage of this budget to what we are trying to do in terms of poverty and tackling inequality. But in the wider sense, the UK, as we speak right now, is in the midst of an unfolding and rapidly deteriorating economic and financial crisis, and it is going to be ordinary people that pay the price of that. I don't think we've had a more serious economic situation, possibly even including 2008, which was a global financial crash, but in the UK, probably not a more serious situation in our memories. So that has a big impact, and therefore, to come back to your question, our analysis has to continue as this situation unfolds. Second part of your question, briefly, we continue to discuss with local government partners and with the third sector. So obviously we have already taken some decisions that were set out in the programme for government to increased support for advice agencies, giving help to people on the front line. We have set out work around rent levels, and we will continue to do everything we can to support local government. We've most recently had discussions with COSLA to try to give decent pay rises to those working in local government. Lastly, in terms of flexibilities, I think everything we're seeing right now tells us that we need far greater economic and financial levers at our disposal so that we're not at the mercy of decisions taken elsewhere, and we can have the full suite of powers and levers that other governments have to try, not just to stabilise the kind of crisis that has been created right now, but to build the kind of economy and an economy based on equality and well-being that I think there is a majority in this Parliament that wants to see.